Good morning, and thank you for joining us for our third session in the Insight Coffee Chat series. We'd like to thank Nutanix and HPE for sponsoring today's chat. And before we jump into today's topic, let's just do a little introduction. My name is Chris Capusta, and I'm practice manager for our data management practice here at Insight. I've been at Insight for 9 years now. A majority of that time as a principal architect, specializing in storage and data protection technologies. And in my current role, my team and I are responsible for the storage, data protection, automation, and orchestration practice here at Insight. Once again, I'm joined today by one of our most senior architects, and he has quite the impressive background as well, so I'm going to let him introduce himself. Mike, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Well, as Chris mentioned, my name is Mike Corvell, and I'm a lead architect in the cloud and data center solution area. Been here for about 13 years. Had a number of roles in that time. So everything from technical support with our one-call team to professional services into my current role where I do pre-sales architecture and design, primarily focused on storage and compute technologies, both on-prem and in the public cloud. I've been doing this for about 9 years.
Perfect. Thanks, Mike. So today's topic, we're going to talk about using HCI to accelerate hybrid and multi-cloud strategies. More and more environments are moving to hybrid cloud. I think we all realize hybrid cloud is kind of here to stay. And in some environments, there's even the added complexity of multi-cloud. So everybody had the ambition of getting to one cloud provider and then come to find out through maybe technologies, acquisitions, whatever the case may be, we're in multiple cloud providers. On top of that infrastructure, we still have to support on-prem. And so we talked to a lot of clients, Mike, and I just wanted to kind of start today by discussing just some of the high-level challenges that we hear with customers either in these environments, moving to these environments. What are we hearing from challenges around these? So, I think first and foremost, and I think just by the nature of what we just described, environments are really becoming more complex. Gone are the days where we have all of our data inside of maybe one or two data centers. Now we're really moving, that term we like to throw around, the centers of data. There's public cloud, there's edge computing. We still have our, I won't say legacy, but we still have our data centers to manage and maintain. And then again, we even talked kind of multi-cloud on top of that. And with the introduction of all of these platforms, there's now faced with a dilemma of how to manage these environments. We have, again, our on-prem data center. We've been maintaining and managing those for years and years. And as we start to bring on these modern workloads in cloud environments, what we're finding is, public cloud especially is really API driven. And new technologies like containers and Kubernetes really change that conversation, the pets versus cattle, as we like to call it. The workloads I traditionally support on-prem in my data center, especially those legacy workloads, I maintain them, I care for them. If something goes wrong, we spend a lot of time troubleshooting them. And that conversation really kind of changes with some of these modern workloads in the public cloud, the cattle conversation, where if something does go wrong, I simply tear down that particular service or system, redeploy it either through API or infrastructure as code, and bring it back online in a new state. And so that whole kind of mentality of maintaining and troubleshooting almost goes out the window in some aspects. And that's a huge culture shift for a lot of organizations to have to go through. And it's a split personality almost, because you still have to maintain some of those legacy applications in that kind of, I'll say, old school kind of way. And then there's always the trouble of how do you determine which workload should run on-prem or in the cloud? Understanding the workloads, understanding workload dependencies is really key to making these determinations, not just from a technology perspective, but also that financial perspective. Just because I can technically run something in one or the other doesn't make financial sense to do so based upon that workload characteristic. And that's where we see a lot of our clients struggle, because there's a lot of data, there's a lot of workloads out there, and there's a lot of technical debt. And how do I start to sort through that and make that determination of where to place things? And lift and shift rarely makes sense. Running VMs on-prem and then just shifting that to running VMs in the cloud may not make most sense, not only from a technology but a financial perspective. So then we have to go through all the replatforming conversations. We have to balance security requirements, costs, technology limitations, even internal skill gaps. So the that conversation and those troubles become even broader as we start to take all of this into consideration. And then we have, we talked about this in a previous chat, Mike, we have our security drift problems. There's more environments to manage, and generally there's more quote unquote cooks in the kitchen. So, normally it's just IT operations responsible for these systems. Now we have development, QA, other groups that traditionally are not managing infrastructure, getting more and more involved in or more and more part of managing and deploying systems through these modern workloads. And it's tough to enforce and keep security principles in sync. And then on top of that, make it even worse, we have the new security challenges of the world. I know ransomware has been all over the news. It's kind of morphed into data exfiltration. So not just encrypting data and demanding a ransom, but actually stealing the data and demanding a ransom on top of that. And then we even have, kind of the current world events, hostile nation states and just destroying data. So it's kind of morphed into those new forms of bad actors and impacting the data, if you will. So they must be secured. Data still must be protected no matter where it resides. And I know, Mike, you're going to talk a little bit about backups as we go through it today, but that's still important no matter where that data resides. And so these are kind of the top frustrations we hear from our clients, the top challenges. And really these challenges can drastically slow down an organization's transformation efforts. So I know as we're having these conversations, one thing we really like to do is just get a better understanding of the why, the use case, why public cloud, why keep it on-prem. So Mike, if you don't mind, maybe dive into that a little bit. How are our clients leveraging public cloud today, and what's the reality around these thought processes?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit on a lot of the reasons on why people are looking at public cloud. One of the first forays I think customers take in public cloud is around backups. It's around that 3-2-1 data protection methodology where, you have 3 copies of your data, 2 different types of media, and 1 copy off-site. Traditionally, that was probably a tape backup that was sent off-site, and with the advent of object storage in the public cloud and that being kind of cheap and deep storage, that's the first entry point that customers kind of look to public cloud for. And that started, years ago, 5+ years ago. Customers have been doing this, and it's still often a very common use case and usually quite cost effective too. I think the next stage is around some of the newer disruptive technologies that you were talking about, containers, PaaS services, so that's platform as a service. And this is where developers are looking to be able to consume those resources. And we see a lot of kind of shadow IT in this scenario too. And it's just because the public cloud offered it before IT operations did. And operations is definitely adapting and starting to offer these capabilities. But this is an area in which we historically had saw some public cloud adoption. And I would categorize, AI and machine learning in this space as well. Just those new disruptive technologies that may not be available on-prem, but there's a need for the business to be able to take advantage of some of those. And the third use case I would say is around agility. And really that's about not only bringing resources online extremely quickly, but it's about being able to shut them down just as quickly. And this is really important with some kind of more seasonal business models. Think about retail businesses. And retail around Black Friday, around the rest of the holidays, this is when they're going to do a large portion of their business for the whole year. They don't want to, size their environment, purchase that environment, run it on-prem all year long, just to size it for that 1, 2, 3 months where they need it. So being able to bring those resources online, kind of burst in that public cloud, and then when they're done using it, they can shut it down. And it's not just retail that has this. I mean, we see this in finance and accounting firms around tax season. And I think on-prem solution providers are adapting absolutely to this. There's new consumption models that we'll talk about a little bit later, but that's the kind of as a service consumption model. So you can burst on-prem and not necessarily need to pay for those the larger resource capability that you need during that holiday season or that tax season. And probably one of the last most common use cases is just businesses that they want to be out of the data center business. Maybe it's not a large portion of their business, and they just kind of want to, hand off that responsibility to someone else, or they truly just want an entirely operational expenditure model. And this, again, is something that we can do on-prem either through leases or the as-a-service consumption model that I alluded to a little bit earlier. So, the initial use case of going out to the public cloud for operational expenditure is definitely changing, but we've definitely seen that kind of draw some adoption. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Maybe talk a little bit more about Nutanix specifically here. I think they had the advantage of really just being born in the cloud area, or cloud era. It was modeled after how Google built their infrastructure. And so when you scale with Nutanix, when you scale with hyper-converged infrastructure, you're really scaling like you would in the public cloud, right? And really foundationally, let's take a step back. And what does that actually mean? What does that mean to scale like you would in the public cloud? Well, hyper-converged infrastructure is foundationally, there's a lot of things that you kind of expand upon this that can be included in it. But foundationally, it's taken the storage and placing it directly next to the compute. So you no longer have these two kind of discrete systems. They're converged or hyper-converged, as the name implies. This gives you a lot of benefits. I think one of the biggest of them is just that it gives you options. So we talked about options being one of the reasons why public cloud was, people were drawn to the public cloud. Well, Nutanix and hyper-converged is really just bringing a lot of those benefits back on-prem, giving you the options to be able to scale how your business is demanding that you scale. So you get that same kind of agility. An example of this, so you and I both have storage backgrounds. So when we scale hyper-converged and when storage is merged with compute, every single time that you add some storage, you're adding a little bit of compute and memory too. And that gives you a really powerful advantage. So historically, the way before this kind of hyper-converged technology was available, the way that we size storage is we tried to predict what is our future growth going to be? What upcoming projects do we have? What are the other changes in the environment that are going to potentially change the demands on the system? So that way we could size the storage solution to meet the future needs. And that's just something that's entirely not needed, not necessary. It's not something that's done in the public cloud, and it's not something that you need to do with Nutanix, because you are adding more resources to drive that storage every single time you add storage. You can scale just by adding additional nodes, just like you would in the public cloud. And this is actually really increasingly important with flash media. Flash is extremely fast, and as you add more flash, it's really important to be able to add the additional compute and memory to drive that flash. And so that's what's really great about this infrastructure. And so a lot of these advantages that we can do on-prem, Nutanix is able to extend that into kind of a hybrid scenario or a public cloud, and they do that through one way is Nutanix Cloud Clusters. So this has taken all the software that is Nutanix and running that in a virtualized fashion in the public cloud. Again, called cloud clusters. And the big thing that this gives you is, maybe you don't have some of those machine learning functions or the AI functions on-prem, and you want to be able to burst up into the public cloud and take advantage of that. You can do that just by easily deploying cloud clusters, replicating your data to it, taking advantage of some of those workflows that are available, and then just bringing that data back on-prem. And this is just a really simple way to be able to do that and not have to change the format of your containers, your VMs, or however that data, that workload is laid out. And so that we got on-prem, we have cloud clusters in the major hyperscalers, AWS, Azure, GCP. Nutanix has a third offering here, and that's to go to their own data center. So this is called Xi. And so think about this like a public data center, a public cloud data center that just runs Nutanix cloud infrastructure software. So we get the same advantages that we get with cloud clusters, so we can natively replicate it to it. And then with an extension of this being Leap, that's the software that makes you replicate to Xi and then also be able to fail over to it in a disaster recovery scenario. So this is really that simplified cloud DR option that we've seen a lot of customers express interest in. I have a number of customers that are running this too. And so as you can imagine, we now have workloads, we've got applications, they're running potentially on-prem. We have them running up in AWS with cloud clusters or Azure. We maybe have some running over in Xi. That's can become kind of difficult to manage without some sort of tool to be able to help you with that. And so that's why Nutanix has Prism Central. And this is kind of a manager of managers, but also gives you visibility across all of your public cloud and private cloud environments. So it's a hybrid cloud management utility. And that will give you your centralized alerts, your centralized configuration of some of the items. And maybe most importantly, it gives you a centralized repository of just understanding what's running where. So you can search for an application, a container, a VM, whatever you kind of categorize your workloads as, and you can determine where are they running. And as an extension of this, how many more resources do we have in those environments? So there's a feature called Runway, and this is a pretty powerful one. It's really fun to demo, and this is about predicting future growth. So once Prism Central is in your environment for a period of time, it's able to look at the trends that are in your environment with resource consumption for CPU, memory, storage, what have you, and then determine, in 1 month, 2 months, 1 year, 2 years, this is when I'm going to run out of resources. And typically it's not going to be in that 2-year time frame, just because we're able to scale in such a linear fashion with resources. We don't have to buy 2, 3, 4, 5 years worth of infrastructure. We can keep just adding nodes and being kind of around that 1-year timeline. But what Runway also allows you to do is simulate what it would be like to either clone some existing workloads. So say you're going to deploy a new application, and it's going to have X SQL database and B app server and this other web server. You can clone all that from your existing environment, or just simulate new and then see what that does to your runway. And business leaders really like this because it's concrete data in terms of historically, this is how we've grown. When are we going to run out, so they can budget appropriately for that? And then as part of that whole budgeting process, we can even show if we add one more node into the cluster, or add just some compute resources, or remove some stuff off and maybe go to the public cloud, what does that look like? So your options are pretty limitless here. And it's just a really powerful tool to be able to show, when am I going to need to purchase more infrastructure in my on-premises cluster. And so all this talk about cloud here, Azure, AWS, Google, I mean, we barely really mention cost, and public cloud isn't free, and it may not necessarily be, the cheapest option. So Nutanix has Xi or cost governance. And really what this is a tool that can help organizations get some visibility into the environment and, optimize the environment for one, but then also if there's a desire at the organization, you can provide metering and chargeback services to different lines of business. And there's a lot more features in terms of how Nutanix will integrate with public cloud, but the last one that I want to call attention to is Frame. And so this is one that was kind of born up in the public cloud, but has been since brought back down on-prem. And so it's a true kind of hybrid multi-cloud solution, and that's around desktops as a service or virtual apps. So that's, traditionally you were thinking of maybe VMware or Citrix. Frame is another option directly from Nutanix. So it, again, natively integrates with everything that that I've been talking about here. And you can run it in any of those public clouds or on-prem on Acropolis Hypervisor. So I've talked a little bit about, or I've alluded to, with as-a-service consumption models now a couple of times. Chris, maybe you want to talk a little bit about what Nutanix has in this space and what HPE is offering?
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate that, Mike. And so you're absolutely right. We've both mentioned it a few times. We've kind of danced around the topic, and so what I wanted to do first, before maybe jumping into specific offerings, is just kind of talk about the as-a-service market in general, what the analysts are seeing, what we're seeing, maybe do a couple definitions to kind of help folks at home, just understand the difference between the different models that they have available to them now. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you were talking about Nutanix and some of that cloud-like consumption is, we've moved into this hybrid world. We're consuming that cloud infrastructure in a subscription as a service type model. It's, pay for what you're using, and you don't have to buy it in that traditional Capex sense where, the planning 3 to 5 years is a perfect example of that. And, now that we have this modern API-driven consumption-based environment that we're running in, there's definitely an appetite to go back to our on-prem environment and modernize that as well. We need to keep infrastructure up to date. There's security reasons, there's operations reasons. I think we covered some of that very early on, but what's important here is I have options now on how I consume that infrastructure. And so what I'm going to start with is just kind of a quick couple slides here on what the market looks like and for as a service. So you can see there's a lot of stats on the screen here of over the next 12 months, what's the planned use for some of these as a service models. But really more and more as organizations utilize public cloud, there is a desire to just standardize the financial operations between the two. I need my on-prem environment to be agile as well. You talked a lot about agility, Mike, and if I have to procure things in that traditional CapEx sense, I'm either overbuying to get that agility because I think I might use it down the road, and what I really give up when I do that is flexibility, because if my needs change and my usage starts to decrease, now I've got excess infrastructure sitting there that I paid for, but I just can't use. So, even some of the top analysts out there really, the Capex model acts as a throttle on innovation. So, we've kind of beat this point a few times here, but that idea that I have to plan 3 to 5 years in advance, hope I plan for enough, hope there's no emergency spending because I've undersized, and then I think the new state of the world, the way innovation happens right now, especially with newer workloads like containers, like AI and machine learning workloads, data is being generated at an unprecedented rate, and trying to plan for that now, what we're going to be doing in 3 to 5 years, I think it's just becoming a task that's not necessarily impossible, but it does a disservice to the organization and the way we want to transform. So, the analysts kind of see it this way. What we're seeing in the market kind of matches there. But let's just take a couple minutes and walk through the different definitions here, if you will. So I think we're all familiar with the Capex model. I like to equate it to building a house. I sit down, I plan everything I'm going to need in that house the entire time I'm going to live there. I build it out. I hope it's enough room. I hope I can accommodate the size of my family and everything else. And if not, if I've undersized it, well, then I'm looking at expensive additions or possibly even moving unexpectedly. And if I undersized it, I'm paying for a lot more house than I need. So, that Capex model, all upfront cost, pay for all of it regardless of what's used. It is the higher initial outlay of capital, could be the likely lower long-term cost. And then, that Opex model, and traditionally in the industry, this has been a lease. So I take the equipment, I take the kind of total purchase price, I break it up over a lease term, and while on the books it looks like an Opex model, there's still FASB rules for reporting. I still own title on that hardware, so I've got to depreciate it, which could affect my profit reporting. And most like typical leases, it's probably more expensive in the long run than just buying it outright. And that kind of shifted. And that's what brought about kind of this as a service or consumption model. So I'm gonna have a lower initial outlay of capital. So if I'm trying to be if I'm trying to control some of that spending and not necessarily make those large CapEx purchases, I'm gonna have a lower initial outlay here. I can flex up or down, and that's really key when you're looking at that agility that Mike you talked about earlier. Is my needs are going to change. I think to say any business is going to be static for the next 3 to 5 years is no longer the case in today's world. So as my needs change, the infrastructures can change with it. If my workloads are highly variable, this could be the lowest cost. And Mike, you gave a great example with the retail conversation. During busier times of the year, around holidays, around vacations and summer and things like that, when spending starts to shift and needs start to shift, I can flex up, I can flex down, and not pay for all of that infrastructure upfront to accommodate those peaks. If it's static workload, then yeah, it could be higher cost. And Insight has some great ways to determine if workloads are a good use case for this as a service model. So happy to help there. But most importantly, this is not a lease. All of the vendors, and we'll talk about HPE here in just a second, but they'll continue to hold title on that hardware, so it doesn't appear on your books. There's no FASB rules for reporting. You don't have to worry about depreciation or life cycle or anything like that. And even though they're still owned title, one thing to keep in mind here is this is dedicated hardware to you. So you're not sharing. It sits inside of your four walls of your data center, or maybe inside of your colo. In some cases, it can even sit in your public cloud tenancy. So this is infrastructure that's dedicated to you. We just consume it like we do inside of the public cloud. And then, comparing that to the cloud consumption, cloud could have the, a lowest initial outlay. Again, until I start using something, I don't pay for anything. It does have the most flexibility, kind of that infinite capacity. Give or take, there's infinite costs that go along with that. I can flex up or down as well. Could be the highest pricing, and then you do get those quote unquote hidden fees, the ingress, egress, API, and unless you have those direct connections to the cloud providers, there could be some extra costs that go along with utilizing that infrastructure. So why as a service? Consumption model like public cloud, again, we don't have to worry about that upfront pricing, pay for what you use, you get that flexibility, that agility that Mike talked about. Could be a good financial tool if you're looking to avoid Capex purchases, if you're looking to avoid traditional leases, but still want a way to lifecycle and refresh infrastructure and really pay for what you're using on that infrastructure. It could help you accelerate to public cloud or be part of that hybrid cloud strategy. Again, as workloads move back and forth, as Mike mentioned earlier, things like Nutanix cloud clusters or Docker containers or Kubernetes, if I'm shifting data and workload back and forth between my on-prem environment and the public cloud environment, I want to make sure I'm just paying for what I use in each of those environments. And again, not have excess capacity sitting on one side or the other. So I get a way to rebalance that capacity across hybrid cloud as my strategies change. And then it's just kind of that way to reduce risk and uncertainty. So again, I don't have to prepay, I don't have to plan, all the things we talked about Capex. I'm not going to reiterate those here once again, but just know that you get that flexibility that we're kind of looking for as we manage those hybrid cloud environments. So that's kind of the as a service market definition, what we're seeing, what the analysts are seeing. When we look at Nutanix and HPE in this case, HPE's GreenLake program is really their infrastructure as a service program. And when you look at that broad HPE portfolio, anything inside of that portfolio, and even some third-party partners like Nutanix and some data protection vendors and a few others, it really gives organizations a way to bring that technology in-house in a consumption model, pay for what I'm using, in that subscription fashion, and really get that flexibility and agility that I want to mimic inside of the public cloud. As we size these environments, as we bring the capacity and compute on-prem that we need, there's always a little buffer built in. And again, you're not paying for it until you use it. But as your needs change, as you need to burst up or burst down, we have that excess capacity ready and available, and as I use it, I just start paying for it. As I stop using it, I stop paying for it. And again, all of these, because this is as a service, there's SLAs around this as well. So I know supply chains are a challenge right now, especially for those kind of traditional Capex purchases. But these are service agreements with the vendors like HPE. So as my needs change and I need to burst way up and need to bring more infrastructure on site, we're seeing those kind of prioritized over other types of purchases in order for these companies to meet that SLA. So it's from a strategy perspective, a great way to make sure we're getting the infrastructure that we need in a more timely fashion than maybe through some other methods, especially in kind of the state of the supply chain out there. And so, part of that, obviously, HPE has that broad portfolio, but as we look at, Mike went through all of the kind of goodness that Nutanix brings on-prem for that agile cloud-like experience. And, Nutanix and HPE have teamed up together to really create these Nutanix DX nodes. And these are HPE reference architecture that I can run the Nutanix software on. Again, if I'm consuming this through the GreenLake program, I get that cloud-like scale, that cloud-like consumption. I can scale up, I can scale down. I can get that agility that I'm looking for, and because these are purchased, quote unquote, or consumed, I'll say is a better word here, through the GreenLake program, I get to match those cloud-like financials, that consumption financials that I'm doing inside of the public cloud. So just bringing that parity, not only from a performance agility perspective, but also that financial modeling of what I'm doing in the cloud versus what I'm doing on-prem. So, Mike, I know it's a conversation as a service is one we're having more and more every day. There's definitely interest in the market, but really it just changes that way that we consume that on-prem infrastructure and gives us that agility that you talked about quite a bit earlier on the Nutanix side. So I know we've covered a lot today. I'd like to thank Mike for joining me on this chat. I know these are conversations you're having every day with clients, so your experience and pun intended insight here has been extremely valuable. Again, would like to thank Nutanix and HPE one more time for sponsoring this chat today. And we talked about a number of topics today: hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, hyper-converged, as a service, workload alignment, even modernization. And as you go down this path of transformation, it can definitely seem a tad bit daunting. I think we hear that quite a bit: is where do I begin? Where do I go? How do I get to my destination? So Insight can definitely help demystify these topics. We can help in any part of that digital transformation journey. We have a number of assessments. We have our workload alignment offering to determine the best home for workloads and the infrastructure they should run on. So for more information, schedule a follow-up, just see how we can help, just visit us at solutions.insight.com. So Mike, I'd like to thank you again for the time today.
You bet. Thanks, everyone.